on stage Mr. Dhritiman Chatterjee, Surya Deo and Kapilas Bhuyan who will all be part of this discussion today. So Satyajit Ray, he is a filmmaker who is, one of India's most widely watched, widely viewed filmmakers, most widely recognized names in Indian cinema. He also, one of the things that we felt as when we were reading him or when we were watching his films as youngsters was also that he was also his stories travel a lot, in the sense that characters in his stories also travel a lot, particularly the Feluda series. And there are two stories, in fact, that relate directly to Bhubaneswar. So one is Kailashe Kelenkari, which is about a Yaksha sculpture that is retrieved by Feluda, who is the sort of detective figure which is retrieved by Feluda, and it's from the Rajarani Mandir in Bhubaneswar. The other, of course, is Hottapuri, which is set in Puri, but it goes back and forth between Bhubaneswar and Puri. And in that, there is also Satyajit Ray's very parodic lines about, it's a poem that's quoted in the text about the many anonymous artisans who made this city so beautiful. So he did have a deep connection with the city, but I won't take any more of the time and instead put the first question to Dhritimanda about, you've of course had a very long relationship with Satyajit Ray, and we have heard you and others also speak about his process and how he went about his films and your relationship with him. Is there anything there which you feel is not very well known about Satyajit Ray, and an aspect of his work, for instance, which you think is really interesting but doesn't often get addressed in discussions like these?
That's a very, is this mic working? Yes, I hope so. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Sujaan. Actually, this question itself hadn't occurred to me, because obviously Rai has been discussed so much, he's been discussed in and out and threadbare. One of the things that has always occurred to me is that, whereas Rai's creativity, his artistry, his aesthetic sense, all of this has been discussed, what never gets discussed is that, and I think it was very important to his success, is the fact that he was an intensely practical kind of man, as a filmmaker, because he was a filmmaker, he was a writer, he was a musician, and a lot of this, as we know, he made films from the beginning right till the end. He had to make films on relatively limited budgets. On the one hand. On the other hand, he had a constant team of cinematographer, editor, assistants, and so it was almost like an extended family. Mm-hmm. And he was in charge of that family's day-to-day, month-to-month existence. Right. So therefore, he was very, very conscious all the time of the nitty-gritty of filmmaking, the fact that you had to keep, budgets, schedules within limits, you had to achieve economies, how to do that. So that aspect of Rai, it fulfills his, it kind of rounds off his personality, the Rai we know, and it is very important to understanding him as a filmmaker.
It's a very interesting point, and one that doesn't often get mentioned, because it also has to come from someone who has worked with him intimately and known his work as his process intimately. So thank you for sharing that.
Sorry, I hope I'm not boring you. If you want, I'll give you an example.
I was wondering about that. Yeah,
sure. From the very first film that I had the good fortune to make with him, which, as it happens, was a little over 50 years ago, in 1970, we were making a film called Pratidwandi, which translates as The Adversary, and we were shooting on a beach in Digha, shooting a dream sequence, which was a fairly complicated sequence. You know, it had lots of people, it had policemen with rifles, it had a bus being, you know, beaten down by... So, certainly for a Bangla film, a elaborate kind of sequence which involved a lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of money, and so on. And there is one shot where, you know, it's my dream, I'm having a dream, and I see my sister running towards me in the garb of a nurse. Now, why nurse? That, those who have seen the film know why nurse. So, shot finished. I finished the shot. He said, okay. One of his assistants came and said, Manikda, we'll have to take this shot again. So I said, why? So he said, you know, this girl, when he's running towards this man, there is a hair clip hanging next to his ear. So we'll have to take this shot again. So Manikda said, don't worry. You know, this is a dream sequence. So the critics will interpret this also. They'll find a significance to this also. So don't worry. So he let the shot pass.
That's wonderful. I mean, not just the practical side, which of course is there, but also this slightly flippant kind of a thing which, I mean, looking at his films and looking at him, you don't often get a sense that he's, I mean, the gravitas is so overpowering that we tend to overlook the person as he was. I think just to, you know, recapitulate the films that have resonated with us over the years, I was wondering, Kapilas ji, if I could ask you, you must have seen the work of Satyajit Ray, I'm sure you have. So is there, or are there a set of films that particularly resonated with you that are, you know, your picks among the films by Satyajit Ray? And if you would share with our audience what you find in that appeals to you.
Thank you, Sujaan. Good evening, audience. Namaskar. Before I answer to you, I want to relate to what he was just telling about the dream sequence.
Yes.
It was a bad dream in the afternoon. And this is quite abstract.
Yeah.
So this has also happened in Nayak.
Right, absolutely.
There is a lot of dream sequences there as well. And my pick is very popular, like everyone likes it. That's Charulata.
Wonderful.
Undoubtedly. And of course, I started viewing Ray from Aparajito. First I saw Aparajito.
Right.
Then Padre Pancheri.
Okay, okay.
So I like the trilogy, but Charulata is my take. Very
Wonderful.
Close to my heart.
Okay.
And again Nayak. And Ordinary Din Ratri.
Okay.
So these are my takes.
So what appeals to you most about Charulata or Nadin Ratri?
The revealing of the relationship.
Yeah.
It is never overboard. It is well measured. And you get the pang. You get the pang in your heart. But here. That's the mastery. And by that time, Ray has improved with his techniques.
Yeah.
And so, look, the form is not important because he is making films out of literature.
Right.
So, his craftsmanship is so wonderful. And I think his techniques improved by Nayak a lot.
I see, I see. Okay, thank you for that. And you also raise a point which we will be discussing at length over the course of this discussion, which is Satyajit Ray not just as filmmaker, but also his relationship with literature. And by relationship, I don't just mean what he wrote himself, but of works that he translated into film. But apart from that, he was also, as many of you would be aware, I mean, he designed many book covers. I mean, he started his career in advertising, right? And he went on to design many book covers, compose scores of his own films, other films as well. So before the conversation, Surya, you were mentioning that he also designed book covers in Odia. Is that right?
Thank you, Sujaan. Dhritiman Ji, Kapilas Bhai, namaskar to you all. Let me start from a famous quote of Kurushova about Ray. That is, if you have not seen the film, if you have not watched the film of Satyajit Ray, it is like that you have not seen the moon and sun by living on the earth. What a great comment that was. About Ray connection to Odisha and to the Odisha literature and Odia film, there is very lesser known facts are there. First, he portrayed a cover for renowned poet, author J.P. Das. That is Pratham Purus. And I do have that cover book. You can see it. This is. Please zoom the camera if you have. And this was in 1972. And the publisher of this book was Mr. Ananta Mahapatra. Mr. Ananta Mahapatra was a very nice relationship with Mr. Ray. So, and one of his relative of Ray's, Minu Mukherjee, she was close to J.P. Das. Most interestingly, I will read out a letter to J.P. written by Satyajit Ray. And this is the first draft. Just listen to it. Before submitting, before giving the cover page designing, what he has written, Dear Mr. Das, herewith the finished design for the book jacket. I am afraid you will have to get the lettering executed by somebody in the space indicated. The name of the book will go on the first block in bracket in green, your name in the second block in bracket in deep gray. I'm sorry I have kept you waiting all this time, but I really have been busy. With good wishes, Satyajit Ray. This letter was on 26th 1st, 1972. Just see the dedication, see the infused what he have done in the cover designing. And moreover, second part is about his film to be directed in Odia, but it was not there. When Babulal Doshi, as you all know, started his film Matira Manisa, Matira Manisa was supposed to be directed by Ray. But what happened, and initially Matira Manisa rights was being taken away by K. Appas with rupees of 25,000. And when Karandeep Panigrahi was asked by Babulal Doshi for the rights, he has a condition that if Satyajit Ray will direct the film, then I will give you the rights. I can bring out the rights from K. Abbas and I can give you that. Sukhalata Ray, she was PC of, auntie of Satyajit Ray, and she was staying at Cuttack. She has been married to Dr. Jayant Rao. And Sukhalata Ray has translated the Matira Manisa into Bengali. So, in connection with Sukhalata Ray, Babulal Doshi went to Satyajit Ray. But Satyajit Ray was a very strange, as Dada was telling about his practicality. He has some condition. He told me that, he told to producer that I can direct the film, but not now. After 1.5 half year, I can direct the film. But before that, I have to stay in Odisha for around 6 months. I have to move different places. I need a vehicle for that. I need another person who knows Bengali and Odia both. So who can teach me Odia and who can teach me the culture of Odia. And we have to wait for that. And whenever Ray was coming to Odisha, he was staying in a BNR hotel in a particular room. And that room number was 30. Babulal Doshi was not prepared for the cost. So he told Ray that you suggest two names. You can't direct the film, but you suggest two names. First, Ray suggested the name of Tapan Sinha. Babulal Doshi went to Tapan Sinha. Tapan Sinha was very busy at the time for a Hatte Bajare film that you was doing. So he refused. Then Babulal Doshi came to Ray again, and Ray suggested Midalson name, and rest is history. But after watching the film, after the premiere of the film Matira Manisa, Ray wrote a letter to Babulal Doshi. That letter I do have, and I will read out that in the next question when Sujaan will ask me.
Shall we just hear the letter right now itself, or
Oh,
do you-
sure.
since we are on the topic, may as well.
His favorite hotel was
Bhuyan
in
Hotel.
Pune. He had another favorite hotel in Gopalpuram,
Yeah.
where he hid away to write a lot of his scripts.
What's the name of that hotel? I don't
I'm
know.
just trying to remember. It was from that time. It was a hotel, one of the larger groups. I mean, not Taj, but maybe Oberoi or something. And he used to come there quite often because, you know, I mean, I don't know why they had a hotel there because Gopalpuram was not that popular as a tourist place. But he used to come there. And he had one particular hotel where he used to stay.
And he used to stay in Bhuyan Hotel in a particular room, room number 30.
Is that Palm Beach by Oberoi's?
Okay, this letter, Satyajit Ray, 3 Lakh Temple Road, Calcutta, 29, phone number 461817. And this letter was written and dated 7th March 1967, after the premiere of Matira Manisa, and that was on 6th March 1967 in Calcutta. The letter goes like this. It is clear that both his head and heart went into the making of Mridal Sen's first Odia film, Matira Manisa, the result in a film that one can feel for as well as be stimulated by. Its blend of techniques is something, its blend of techniques is something, its blend of film technique is also something which sets the film apart. While Sen points up the family relationship in this rural Sega with poetry and subtle observation, he is not averse to using state method when it comes to setting a story, firmly in a definite time and a definite place. The most remarkable thing in the film, however, Sen must share the credit with the performance for sustained excellence and conviction. The acting, this is more important, the acting in Matira Manisa has few equals in the Indian cinema. I congratulate everyone concerned in making up this bold film, Satyajit Ray, 7/3/1967. And this letter is being published with the Babul Doshi biography, Amada Bataru Akitutya Parchata.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for bringing that to light, because I don't think, I mean, I'm not a scholar of Satyajit Ray's work, but I take an active interest and I had never known about this connection till you happened to mention that. So thank you so much. Moving on from Satyajit Ray's cover designs and an aborted project, Dhritiman, I was wondering, taking off from what we were discussing earlier, which is Satyajit Ray's relationship with literature. And this is something that keeps, I mean, so many of his films are based on literary texts, and what he does with them, of course, is something quite remarkable because there, I mean, it's often an adaptation in the truest sense of the term, in the sense that from the literary form to the cinematic form, there is a certain translation that takes place of a change of language also. So I was wondering if you have thoughts on the literary aspect of Satyajit Ray, as well as the process through which he would write his own scripts.
The question you've raised, actually, you know, it can just, discussing
vast.
this can take the rest of the evening, but I'll try and, address it briefly. One of the things, since you raised the question of literature, one of the things about Ray is, we often play this what if game.
Right, yes.
What if, as in, suppose Satyajit Ray had not made films, or suppose Satyajit Ray had made Pather Panchali and it had fallen flat on its face,
Yes.
and he had to look for something else to do.
Yeah.
What would have happened? The answer to that is that he could have been a very successful writer. He was a successful graphic artist and advertising art director. or he could have been a musician. I mean, the issue is that he was a very accomplished writer. I don't think there is any example certainly in India of another. I mean, there are people who used to write, but I don't think there's another example in India, or indeed I'm trying to think of an example elsewhere, of a writer, of a real, genuine writer who was also an exceptional filmmaker.
Right.
And a writer who did not just write once in a while to when his fancy took him, but wrote regularly and consistently and prolifically. One of the things, as we all know, is that he used to, one of the reasons among many, why he wrote children's literature was to revive Sandesh, a literary magazine that had been started by his grandfather, and which was kind of going
yes.
moribund. So Shotit Rai's connection with literature was very, very strong, very, very deep, which that is as far as his own writing is concerned.
Right.
Looked at in another way, he is one of the few examples, in my opinion, or certainly that I can think of a person whose cinema derived, more often than not, derived all the time from literature. Not just his own. I mean, his own story actually is very little. If one comes to think of it, his own story is just Nayak.
Yeah.
Everything else.
Kanchenjunga.
I have a question actually.
And Kanchenjunga. Right.
I do have a question actually. Why did he choose only Vibhuti Bandyopadhyay's story actually, basically?
Why is very, he chose, if we think after 19th century, Rabindranath Tagore and Prabhat Kumar Mukherjee in Devi, if we think early 20th century, Vibhuti Bhushan, we also think early 20th century Tara Shankar in Ashwini Shankar, and then later his contemporaries, which is Shunil Ganguly, Moni Shankar Mukherjee, etc. Now, the why question, it's interesting, but it's a hypothetical question, and we can go on and on about that. But the point is that he was very sensitive to the literature of the time for whatever reason, and he believed that his cinema could derive from literature. My hypothesis, which again is another to me important topic, but again we can go on for hours about that. My hypothesis is that he was so interested or so committed to literature because his cinema was intensely socially conscious. The social commitment of his cinema, the social consciousness, call it political consciousness, give it whatever label you want, that came from his understanding of writers who dealt with the reality of their societies.
That's a wonderful way of looking at it, absolutely. And if we are looking at cinema that is relevant to society and relevant to one's own time, it's also interesting to ask ourselves how he was received elsewhere. And I was wondering if Kapilas ji would like to mention, if at all you think that his cinema had an impact on filmmaking elsewhere in Odisha, for instance, or how would he have been received, or what was filmmaking like in that time here? So, is there anything that connects the two?
Okay, before I delve there, let me pick up cue from again Dhritiman. So when he was in advertising agency in 1947, no, before that, he has done the cover design of Pather Panchali.
Right. Yes.
So he must have come in terms with Pather Panchali while doing so, I imagine.
I'm not sure which edition was that, but yeah.
That was probably the
It
first
must
edition.
have,
That was the paperback, and he was doing designs for Signet Press
Right,
at that
right,
time. So a lot of Signet Press publications.
yeah. Right.
Yeah. And the most important year was 1950, when he met
Mm-hmm.
Jean Renoir,
Mm-hmm.
when he had come here to make his
Mm-hmm.
river. So that was actually his discussion with Renoir has inspired him so much. Then his subsequent visit to London. And he saw bicycle thieves.
Yes.
So neorealism actually inspired him, and this novel, through which he claims he came to know Bengal,
Right.
the rural Bengal.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the formative years, I believe, whatever little I have read, could have given him the direction. So he was Calcutta boy, but he didn't know the rural Bengal, and so he became master of both the city and the rural space.
I mean, he did go to art. I mean, he did go to Shantiniketan, so I'm sure he wasn't entirely unfamiliar with it. But I mean, accessing it through a literary text like that, of course, adds a certain perspective which he may have discovered through Vibhuti Bhushan. I take your point.
So the next point is, when you are adopting a literature into film, what is the risk? Because as Andrei Tarkovsky put it, saying that when you are adopting a literature into film, most readers will say that while reading the book, the way I have imagined, the film is not like that.
Right.
That's the worst risk.
Absolutely.
But I really do not know what must have happened during Patri Panchali's release in Bengal, how people received it. But I think he has done a wonderful job. He was too sincere to himself and to the work, literary work. And it's a great film of our time.
So, yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry
Please,
to
no.
interrupt, but before I lose that, I just want to add something to what you said about Tarkovsky, which is that in Sculpting in Time, Tarkovsky, on this subject, he says that I have no interest in making films from great works of literature. Because great works of literature, they are great in their own right. I mean, I'm not going to be able to add anything to their... I would rather make films out of literature that, to me, has cinematic qualities but isn't great literature. I mean, take a person like Joseph Losey, for example, who made films from James Hadley Chase and Pulp Fiction. So I thought that was, since you mentioned Tarkovsky, that's a very interesting thing that Tarkovsky said about literature and literature into cinema.
Probably because obscurant literature gives wonderful scope than great literature. Then Tarkovsky was also very critical, who adopts literature into film. So that's not our context, so we shall not go there.
So was there, I mean, in the 1950s, maybe even later, was there an impact that you felt, that you think was there?
The Odia film history, like historian is there. We took a big gap after making the first film.
Right.
So
Which was when, approximately? 1936, okay.
Actually, what you are talking, Sujaan and Dada was talking, the literature part and film part. Literature is a different medium and film is a different medium. The impact of Ray on Odia film, what happened in 50s and 60s, maximum Bengali director was directing the Odia film.
Right.
Like the first film, okay, let's forget the first film. The second film started in 1948 and that was being directed by Bengali Kalyan Gupta.
I see.
Third film, Sri Jagannath, it was in 1950 and that was being directed by Bengali director Chittaranjan Mitra. But in 60s what happened, the Ray impact in Odisha film was much there, and that's why Amar Ganguly, a young director from Bengal, when he came to Odisha, and we started the journey from literature to film in a film called Ambada Bhatta, and that was
Right.
1963. And if you look Amada Bhatta, what Ray has done in his film, the same thing, the culture, the costume, the craft and the way of speaking.
Right.
Amada Bhatta's story is there. It's a novel. It was a novel by Basant Kuwari Patnaik, and the film by Amar Ganguly. In the film, you will see certain scene which is not being included in the novel, and that was the impact of Ray. And what Prabhat Mukherjee did, Prabhat Mukherjee again a Bengali director, he came to Odisha and he has done many number of films in Odisha. He stood a subject in the year 1963, and that was from Ashapurna Devi Chhadapatra.
Right.
Ashapurna Devi Chhadapatra was being transformed to Odia film in Sadhana. And here in that film also you can see, you can watch the impact of Ray in Sadhana. And in particular in the 60s, many Bengali directors came to Odisha, like Amar Ganguly, Amit Mitra, Chittaranjan Maitra, and Prabhat Mukherjee.
I see.
Prafulla Sengupta was also there,
I see.
who directed Arundhati and Sri Lokanath. And all this director was inspired by Ray. And here another director, Nitay Palit, he was not inspired by Ray. He was inspired by Ritik Khatak.
Okay.
He was much more inspired by Meghna Katara, and he converted Meghna Katara into a film Malajanna in 1965. But
so?
the impact of Ray in Odia film up to 60s was there.
Right. So, since we are talking about the impact of Satyajit Ray, before we kind of draw this discussion to a close, I also think that, especially in the centenary year, there's almost weekly discussions on Satyajit Ray that are happening across Bengal. And one of the worst things that I feel can happen to an artist is that they become deified, and it becomes a static cultural phenomenon that is not critically engaged with after their, in the afterlife of their work. So, of course, Dhritimanda has, your association with Satyajit Ray has continued beyond the films that he made in terms of Aguntuker Pore and more recently with Professor Shonku and a few of the other Satyajit Ray Feluda films that you have also worked in. But I was wondering whether what you feel about this kind of, how Satyajit Ray is received today, how he is remembered, and whether you think that there may be more productive ways of re-engaging with Satyajit Ray.
Yeah, that's a very important question. One of the ways, as you're saying, of course, is for more of his work to be made into films, which is happening. Shonku, we did the first Shonku, then the pandemic came. The problem with Shonku, of course, is that they're complicated productions. They're in way out places, in remote parts of the world.
Absolutely,
But Feluda continues. That's one thing. And also there are, because of the Rai centenary year, films which are not taken from Rai stories but are somehow associated with characters created by Ray. Films like that are being made by the more promising directors. So that's one aspect.
That's wonderful.
But the other aspect is that I have always felt that, just putting Ray up on a pedestal, and like we do with our political leaders, just, erecting a statue and hanging a garland on the person's birthday, and then forgetting all about him for the rest of the year, that is not going to do anything. It will be just the worst kind of lip service, but the kind of lip service that we are all very good at. I will describe it graphically to say that we put up statues to people. Most of the year, the statues are covered with crow droppings, and then the birthday comes, the statues are cleaned, some songs are sung, garland is put, and that's it. So there is a danger of that happening to Rai, which will be very. So therefore, what I feel is that critical evaluation is very important, and which means that younger filmmakers, younger film scholars will have to get engaged in dealing with Rai's cinema. Grants, scholarships, which are earmarked for serious studies of Rai's cinema.
Right.
That kind of thing
Right,
is
right.
necessary. Now, I mean, we are celebrating his birth centenary, which is okay, but to me, it is not of very great value because we'll soon forget about it. Let us try and do something meaningful. Now, meaningful, where will those meaningful steps come from? I will be very candid. I do not have a great deal of expectation from this government's culture department or information and broadcasting department. I don't want to bring politics into this, but I am pessimistic about that. So therefore, in my view, it will have to be private initiative, it will have to be the initiative of universities to make
Right,
that happen,
right.
to rekindle an interest in Rai and study of his works and critical evaluation of his works.
Thank you so much for that, because it's a tricky question, but I suppose for artists like that, it's always important to kind of reinvent them, reassess their relevance. So this is a question that, I mean, it's really an open question. So do you think that, do you feel that his work has relevance to a contemporary viewership? I mean, in Odisha or elsewhere? I mean, is there a reason why someone should be drawn to it?
Hello. Nothing is irrelevant.
Yeah.
So first I will start from one of his stories which is made into a film.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Anukul
Right.
by, who is the director, Kahani director? Whoever. So Anukul is a film about a robo being hired by a history teacher, and he is taken home. And in the school, in the local areas, they are reacting like, these robots will make us unemployed. Why have you got it?
Shujit Sarkar, is it?
Pardon me?
Shujit Sarkar, is it?
Yes. So when the unemployment question comes, there are so many human beings in this country. Why do you need a robot?
Mm-hmm.
Then we are in an era where technology has taken the front seat.
Mm-hmm.
So we adopt technology to sack employees. Ray, kind of a guy, can foresee the crisis in future, I must say.
I mean, in a sense, that has been a process that, I mean, people have been arguing that, you know, since industrialization, that kind of has happened, but it's also to kind of detect that problem and project that into the future. So that definitely is...
The story was so futuristic.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think what I'll do is, since we are almost at the end of the time allotted for this session, and really a discussion like this can go on for hours, and discussions like these have been going on as well. So without testing our audience's patience, let me open this to the floor, and if you have any questions, comments or observations about the discussion or indeed about Satyajit Ray, I mean, it's not every day that we get such an eclectic but also involved panel talking about Satyajit Ray. So if you have any questions, comments, please share them with us. Thank you. Okay, so
There's more interesting fare. There's a ghazal program.
there is one at 7. Yes. Okay, so is there any sort of concluding thoughts that you have, concluding remarks
Let
that you
me
wish to
conclude.
share?
Actually, to me, what touches more about Ray
Yeah.
films is that I do believe that Ray doesn't show solution in his film. And the solution, the conclusion part, it goes to audience.
Right.
And that's the most, what I can say, that's the most touchable thing. That's the most, that legacy is still continuing with the present filmmakers. And that's the greatness of Ray.
Yeah, I mean, it really, again, not to fall back on the old trap of glorifying someone unnecessarily, but I think what also makes it relevant is that, you know, while being extremely rooted in his context geographically, socially, I mean, the point that you're making right now is that his films would still carry some significance that went over and beyond that. And I mean, after I learned that this session would happen, I was watching Pratidwandi again. And I mean, there's still so much that, I mean, even if that context isn't there in that literal form, there is still so many of those questions that, you know, remain alive. Yes, Dhritiman.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I find it interesting as well as gratifying that even now, whenever there are, you know, sessions on Rai films and Pratidwandi comes up and so on, young people who are college-going people still now come up to say, you know, we find it so relevant.
Absolutely.
The issues that come up are so relevant to us, to our conflicts. That's extremely gratifying.
No, and as I was watching Pratidwandi again, it struck me that, you know, also it's a little depressing how things don't change in a way, in the sense that I was looking at when you answer that the most significant event that took place in the last decade was Vietnam War, and what is happening in Russia and Ukraine right now. And I was thinking that, you know, just
Except that, you know, I mean, one thing leads to another.
Of course.
The Pratidwandi, the discussion that was had on Vietnam, and if you take particularly Mrinal Sen's Calcutta films of that time, his 3 Calcutta films, one wonders whether in today's social and political environment, those films, I mean, would have been allowed to be screened. I mean, they might well have been censored, or somebody would have said it hurts my sentiments. Why it hurts sentiments? And
probably because it tells the truth. I mean, truth is difficult to handle.
So we are not living in very happy times.
Oh well. So
apart from suggesting the audience to see Anukul, which is available on YouTube, I just want to give a concluding line saying that Ray has made 36 films, 29 feature films, 7 documentaries and whatever. And please see his documentary films. One of them is Bala, who is a wonderful film, and his documentary films are really good. And whatever Ray has given us is kind of a human documentation. He is a great humanist. That's my concluding line.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Surya ji. Thank you, Kapilas ji, and thank you, Dhritimanda, for sharing your thoughts with us. Thanks once again to the Tata Steel Bhubaneswar Literary Meet for hosting this session, and thank you to our audience for staying with us. And well, I think this is one of the concluding sessions. So see you next time. Good night.
Thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. These sessions are also being streamed live on Facebook and YouTube, so they'll be there for people to see and listen to in the future as well. So I really thank you for joining us today. Thank you to all of you as well who have been here with us for the last 3 days. Our concluding session is a performance at the Rail Auditorium by Sonam Kalra and the Sufi Gospel Project. All of you who would like to join us there and do not have passes, you don't have to worry. You can please head to the Rail Auditorium and you can view the program there. It's going to begin shortly. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Thank you to the Bhubaneswar Club for being such a great host. And thank you to Tata Steel as always for supporting these literary meets. Thank you and good night.